Welcome to the Habits of Managed Service for Business Masters. Today's topic is around building and using a service level agreement. You know, I think about this. I'm your host, by the way, Nick Cavalancia. As I've been thinking about this topic, you obviously want to deliver a quality service and a quality product to your customers, but you want to do so all while you're setting the expectation of those customers. As well as while you're trying to protect your own business. And so service level agreements are a very powerful tool that master MSPs use to both ensure that both sides understand what's expected, as well as to measure the success of the work that you're doing as an MSP. But there's still some questions that remain. Things like, do you need one? When you need one? When you don't? What should be in an SLA? And so in this third webinar in a 6-part series that we've been hosting over a 6-week period on the habits of master service businesses, I'm joined by Scott Parker from SolarWinds MSP, and he and I are going to discuss how master MSPs use SLAs and how they make them actionable in order to improve your business. So before we get started, let's just do some brief introductions. Again, I'm Nick Cavalancia from Tech Evangelism. I've got about 27 years of experience in IT. Actually owned 2 different consulting firms, one of which was sort of the precursor to MSPs in that we didn't have the tools back then and in that lifetime of mine, but I did have the same kind of focus, trying to build and have a consistent set of services for a number of small businesses, having all those environments established the exact same way, trying to develop a set of services that I could offer them and grow that business, and was very successful at doing so. And today I own a company called Tech Evangelism, where I consult for and speak to businesses just like yours and to your end customers in trying to help them try to solve some of their problems around IT and infrastructure, organization, and everything kind of in between. So Scott, I'd love to first off welcome you. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be here. Very happy to talk with you guys today.
I'm glad you're here as well. Would you mind giving the audience just a brief intro and a little bio on you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So my career in IT started about 20 years ago as coming in to help support the National Postal Service in Canada from their main headquarters in Ottawa. And I ramped up from there into Hewlett-Packard, where I managed a support team of 70 people working for Verizon and MCI. And then I moved on to a large MSP where I worked for about 7 or 8 years as their service delivery manager. So there I, of course, dealt with lots of SLAs, contracts, all their sales and marketing material, and client coordination and that kind of thing. So very familiar with today's topic and happy to discuss it.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it because I'd love to get as much context as we can to enrich the audience. So before we get started, for you guys in the audience here, just a couple of sort of housekeeping details. We try to make these around 30 minutes in length. They tend to go a little over. They have thus far. So we're going to try to respect your time, but at the same time, if we're getting a lot of good questions or if there's a lot of really good detail being put out there, we want to make sure that you get that as well. So we'll try to keep that time frame. Questions, use the Q&A part of the control panel. Put in questions anytime you want here. I've got them up on the screen here so I can see any questions that you might have, and that way we can try to incorporate those throughout the conversation. And then this call is being recorded, and that way both the recording and the slides will be posted to you guys after the call today. So don't worry if you're wondering, will I be able to see them? You will. So not to worry there. So the first place I want to kind of start with is sort of the when and why you need an SLA in the first place. It's a question. Some of you might be so small that you don't actually have an SLA in place yet, and you're wondering, do I really even need one? And so as you can see by the title of the slide I put up here, you need an SLA. Now, there are a couple of cases when you don't. We'll talk about that in another slide here in a second, but there are a number of really good, solid reasons and examples and scenarios when you'd want to have an SLA. This is something that Scott and I are going to kind of go a little bit back and forth on, try to provide some context and some value here to you. The first one is just, I thought this was a good place to start. I do a lot of work in marketing around tech these days, and improving the client's perception of your business, seeing that you're credible, that you actually have an established business. It's not just like 2 guys that kind of go and do some break fix for some customers, but it's actually more of something where you really have a legitimate business. It's going to help improve the client perception.
Yeah, and I mean, Nick, I'll back you up on that. You want to be coming in looking like you're a professional team. You've got your act together compared to every other MSP that's coming in the door, because our clients get visited regularly by our competition. Even if we're smaller, we can still look bigger, better, and more professional than the next guy by having a good set of SLAs and a good contract in place. And they don't need to be lengthy or deep necessarily, depending on the need, of course, but they do need to be there, and they do need to be well thought out with good reasoning for each of those SLAs to be in place, and you know, all the penalties or bonuses that come and go with hitting those. Laying down a pattern of responsiveness to your customer is really critical, and we need to make sure that we're mapping whatever MSP service offering we're looking to deliver to the needs of the business, because ultimately we're there to make sure that they're happy and they're going to stay with us. So, you know, going in and improving that perception by delivering a really solid SLA really kind of sets you in a class above what a lot of other people are bringing in the door.
Yeah, I have another business called Conversational Geek. It's a publisher of books for technology companies. You guys can go look at it if you like, conversationalgeek.com. All the books are free. But when we were trying to go for one sponsor and have them actually sign up with us, we had just started out of the business. And there's a real parallel here just for somebody that don't have an SLA, where we had a very, very basic contract. It was a one-page, more or less said like, hey, we'll make the book for you and you pay us. You know, that was like the gist of the contract. And the company that we were going into was a particularly litigious type of customer where everything had to get approved by legal. I mean, spend had to be approved by legal. Ridiculous. And so the comment that came back was, I'm assuming by the contract that this is a, and I quote them, a relatively unsophisticated organization. That really hurt.
Oh,
and
ouch.
luckily it didn't hurt the business, right? We got the business out of it, which is great. And then now we have like a 12-page contract that actually is really good. But the whole point is, see, you don't know what they're actually thinking. And the reality is it can hurt your business. So, you touched a little bit, Scott, on actually almost on these next two that I want to bring them up together. And this is about establishing the obligations. One of the reasons you need an SLA is you have to say, this is the stuff that I'm responsible for as your partner. That's the scope of services. That's the types of services you're providing. We'll get into other things like response time and that kind of thing a little later on. But just what it is that I am doing for the money you're paying me, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. And at the same time, there are some obligations that you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, have to deal with as well. You have to make sure that you notify me via email or phone, or you have to make sure you pay on time, or all the things that you want to make sure they understand that they have to do. This is an agreement. It's not a service level agreement. Think about it. It's not just a one-sided. We always think of it one-sided, like if you think of like, let's say Office 365 and Microsoft's SLA. It's not just them saying, we're going to give you services. We're going to provide you Office 365, and we promise that to you. You know, in essence, for you guys, it should be a two-way agreement. It's an agreement that says, yes, this is the services we're going to provide, but also this is the stuff that we require of you in order to be successful and provide those services to you.
Yeah, and I mean, your partner needs to understand that they have a role in providing the IT services. They have a role in introducing you to their team, introducing the ways to get in touch with you to their team. There probably should be an orientation session or some kind of document that they circulate, and they make sure that their user base is aware that you've taken over, you're doing the work, here's how to engage with you, here are the SLAs we've agreed with, because often what I've found in the past is you negotiate that with upper management, but they never pass that down to their individual users. Especially in larger environments, this becomes a massive problem because they either simply wait for your IT guy to show up on site once a month and then they pounce on them, or they assume that everything is an emergency and you're going to get back to them right away for everything. They don't necessarily understand that, you know, a piece of printer toner maybe takes longer than, you know, my system is down. And they also have become very used to, in many cases, if you're going in as the first MSP they've ever dealt with, which, you know, happens still these days, they've been used to that guy in the corner, you know, Steve, the IT guy. They can call him anytime, day or night. He'll just run right over to the desk and fix it. And we need to set up an understanding that that's not exactly what's going to happen now. What's going to happen is you're going to address us through the appropriate channel, and then we've laid out a pattern of SLA and response, and we're going to respond according to those SLAs. And we all need to agree that that's what's going to happen, and that provides additional benefits. It's just different than the way you've done it before.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you're touching on some repercussions that kind of tie into the next two bullets. I'm going to pull them up together a little bit. The first one is it's protecting, for you guys in the audience, your time and your sanity, right? You don't want, you gave the example, Scott, of someone having just some problem. They're expecting you just to jump on it right now. Well, you can't do that as a service provider because you have 12 customers, 20 customers, 100 customers, and you have a certain number of customers per technician and so on, and you're thinking along those lines, you're going to go nuts if you're going to simply just respond to everything, instantly. And at the same time, if that happens, so I'm going to stick with your example, Scott, of kind of maybe you're the first MSP to go into a customer, and you've established an SLA with the upper management that, let's say, a regular call has a 4-hour response time or something, and then the users end up complaining because they are used to Steve in the corner, saying, Steve just comes up immediately, I'll fix your toner problem or your office problem or your machine won't boot. It doesn't matter, do it right now. They end up complaining, and so then the customer comes back to you saying, our users aren't happy, you guys aren't responding fast enough, and you go, oh, no, wait a second here. We're protected. You and I, we agreed on a 4-hour response time. If you'd like to change that, we're happy to do that for you, again, by modifying the SLA. And probably charging them more money for an increased response time, but it provides you a level of protection because you have done those bullets that are above this. You've clarified what you're obliged to do, what they're obliged to do, you've set the expectation, so it really does provide you some level of protection.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's that misunderstanding. It's like a great relationship. You need open communication, and you need to be sure that you're explaining, your side of the picture. You have to understand their side of the picture. Everyone has to be on the same page, because the second that you're not on the same page because you've forgotten to communicate something, you left some gray area or what have you, there is massive room for misunderstanding, lots of room for customers to start complaining up their chain. As soon as that happens, you're kind of falling back on your foot, now making excuses, or now looking to even falling back to your contract and pointing to that and saying, whoa, we had a contract. Even that discussion isn't a great discussion to have. You don't want to be there. So ideally, you work out upfront and be very upfront with what the customer is going to get. Make sure they understand that that's what they're going to get. Make sure they're okay with that. They don't come away feeling like they gave away, some service. Try and position yourself as giving them more service. They're getting the benefits of a great MSP team instead of one guy. They have a team of people to respond instead of one guy. If that one guy is sick, who's supporting you that day? Well, we have, 8, 10, 30 people here who are ready to help you out. Maybe we have a help desk. So there's a bunch of things that we're bringing to the table. And so, yes, you no longer have that instant response to every problem, but we've agreed that the right way to address it with our team is X. And I think that's really one of the most important things. And, you say protect your sanity. If you don't do this the right way and you do leave a lot of gray area and there isn't great communication, then everything falls back to just being an emergency. And you as an MSP suddenly find yourself addressing things that should take 2 days as if they were server failures. And that's not good for you. That's not good for your customer. If you have to reset the expectation, you should go ahead and do that.
And you mentioned, the whole having to go back to the SLA in the middle of an argument about maybe the customer is not satisfied with the service being provided or whatnot. This is one of those ones I had here. I was almost going to put this up while you were talking because it was perfect. And the SLA helps you resolve the dispute because it is what you agreed to. It's interesting. I have this mindset for me, like when I pay my mortgage. I pay my mortgage on the 15th. Now, according to the mortgage company, it's due on the 1st, but I have 16 days of grace is how they put it in the contract. And I can pay on the 15th, and it's completely within the realm of the contract. The contract says that I can do that. They still call me on the 10th. Like, why are you guys calling me? I don't answer them, actually. But that's the conversation I would have, but it's kind of pointless because, of course, it's just some monkey on a phone making a phone call. But it'd be like, why are you calling me? Because we have an agreement. I'm abiding by our agreement, and you give me a certain number of days to pay. So why are you calling me? It's that kind of mentality where you're not trying to beat your customer over the head with the fact that, no, the SLA says 4 hours. See, Mr. Customer, shut up. No, it's more like, no, we agreed on this. I'm happy to change it, but at least you understand, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, that we agreed on this specific level of service level for this specific service. Or maybe if they complain about, hey, how come this platform over here isn't working? You're going, that's not something that we agreed to. It's not in the list of services in the scope of what we're contracted to help you with. I'm happy to add that or to help you service it on an as-needed basis or whatever, but it's not in there. And that's why you have it. It's something that you agree upon and you can always go back to.
Yeah, and okay, so I have a couple of quick points to make on that. You raised some really good items. The partner that you're working with needs to understand that you don't fix everything with a switch and a light on it. We need to be sure we're defining that really carefully as to what we support and what we don't support. And if we don't support it, we want to help you, obviously, as an MSP. We want to take care of your IT needs, just as if someone on site were there to take care of them. So we're going to reach out to a vendor. But those vendors have their own SLAs, and we can't control what those SLAs are or what that vendor does. So we need to make sure our customers understand at some point, that piece of software you run, that piece of, that plotter in the corner or what have you, the backplane on your server, they're under warranty, they're going to break. We are happy to make that call for you because maybe you're not IT savvy, you're not comfortable making that call. Don't worry, we're going to take care of that, and we're going to keep you updated during the course of that process. But we are not responsible for the fact that the clock has to stop while we engage with that vendor. And that is how we have always structured our contracts. As soon as we reach out to a vendor, the clock stops. And we're doing our best to get them engaged and, to solve that problem. But if we have delays with a vendor, all bets are off with how quickly they come back to us. And it really is what's negotiated directly through you and the vendor. The other thing I want to point out is you really have three levers that you can pull. You have money, how much you pay me as an MSP, speed, how quickly I burn through things to get them done, and quality. If you're looking to, spend as little as possible but get top quality, well, then this is why SLAs are created. We can't do everything immediately. Speed has to suffer a little bit. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of great benefits to going with an MSP rather than a small IT team. You want speed, that's great, but perhaps we're going to pay for it. So if you want a dedicated resource, well, there's going to be a fee for that because we don't offer that as part of our standard contract. That is our premium contract, let's say. I'm going to need to dedicate a resource to be available to you all the time. And, just that understanding is important, and I do find customers understand it once you explain it. As long as you have those packages defined, they will, in many cases, choose that package because they feel like business continuity is a premium, requirement to them. Legal firms you mentioned earlier, real estate firms, they live on their mobile devices and in their systems. 5 minutes of downtime isn't acceptable. Speed might be their lever, and great, I'm happy to provide that with a little bit of money on the side. And one last quick thing I do want to mention is penalties. You kind of touched on that a little bit, and actually, did you want to go into resolving disputes, or do you want me to talk a bit on that already?
No, you go ahead. I think I've done a little bit there. You feel free, Scott. You're on a roll, man. Keep going. You're doing just fine.
We went through a process of not having SLAs to building a very solid SLA system because we realized all that gray area was just causing problems left, right, and center for us. Everything was an emergency, and you don't want to be in that situation. Technicians are unhappy. Technicians leave if you put them in that situation, and finding good talent is hard. So we want to put our techs in a comfortable place, and a comfortable place is knowing where the boundaries are and what the rules are. So when it comes to things like penalties, it often is not a bad thing to do to work into your contract that if you don't meet your SLAs, well, what happens? What is the quote-unquote punishment for you not meeting those SLAs? How are you giving your customer the confidence that you're going to do it? And I don't feel I found the perfect way to do it. Nick, maybe you have some insight onto this, but we had built into our contract, we get X number of dollars a month. If we don't hit our SLAs, we lose a bit of that money. If we do hit our SLAs or come in under, we gain a little bit of money. So there was a bit of a bonus for hitting your targets or exceeding your targets, I guess, in our case, or a penalty for missing the targets. And that made the customer feel like, good, if you don't hit your targets, there's going to be a financial burden on you, and there's incentive for your techs to get out there and do what they need to do. And that was how we tackled it. I don't know, Nick, you may have another option for that.
No, actually, it was very similar to that. It was setting the expectation, and like anything, I mean, you guys can think of this even if you don't have anything where you've got penalties in your SLA, or you don't have an SLA at all yet. Just think of yourself as a consumer where you have someone coming to, let's say, redoing one of your bathrooms in your house. And I know for me, I'm never going to pay someone like on a schedule, like a timed schedule, like you pay me 50% within 2 weeks and 40% 3 weeks after that. No. It's all based on performance. And so, because that way you know that their incentive is tied to them getting work done and making you successful. Now, bringing that back to where you're the MSP and you have the customer, it's the same thing there. You should at least, Well, in fact, I'm going to put this last bullet up because this kind of ties into proving your value. In some ways, you're putting your money where your mouth is, to a degree, where I like your thinking, and that's actually similar to what I used to do, Scott, is more so if I don't hit what I'm supposed to do, then there are some financial penalties. Microsoft does it just with the simple SLA they have for Office 365 for the email online, Exchange Online. It's if they don't hit it, they'll reimburse you a certain amount, percentage based on their SLA for that given month. It does restrict it, which is actually good. Going back to 3 bullets up from here from the bottom, providing protection, you want to limit, those penalties as well, where you say, I don't give you all your money back, but I will, give you a certain number, a certain percentage back based on, and a way to calculate that out. So I think that it helps you resolve those disputes, not just from a standpoint of, like I mentioned earlier, about beating them over the head with the contract, going, no, the contract says I have 15 days to pay my mortgage, but also in a way that you can define, should we have a dispute, and should I, the MSP, screw up? There are ways for you to rectify that situation and be compensated duly as necessary. Now, let's do this, Scott. Let's move on to talking about when not to use an SLA. You guys might be surprised to hear on a webcast that's about you should be using an SLA. There are times when you shouldn't be using an SLA, and there are. And in fact, Scott, you almost went there, which I love that because it's so related. You talked about a couple scenarios that kind of tie in here. The first one here is just the fact that you have, I'm going to change that word networks to environments. I mean, it can be just about anything. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put all 3 up here, and we can talk about all of them together, Scott, a little bit. But
sure.
If you look at all of these, the first 2 are more about sort of like there's an uncertainty. And the third one is kind of that same way, but they all tie into uncertainty, I guess, to some degree. But unstable environments, it could just be an application. Like, I've got this server over here that you know nothing about, but you're now my IT person or my IT company, so I want you to manage that thing over there. And you're going, I don't know when it's going to break. I don't know how long it's going to take me to fix that. When you don't know and you can't quantify what, how you're going to support that. And you remember, and on a side note for a second, and I'll finish that sentence. On a side note, remember that your goal as an MSP is to create a productive, profitable, and most importantly, predictable business. That's what you're trying to do. I need predictability because that way I know when I pay my guys this much per hour, I'm making that much per hour and I'm making a profit. Has to be predictable. So if it's an unstable network, unstable environment, application, whatever it is that you don't know anything about, you go, not going to use an SLA. Difficult clients, same kind of thing. You're not sure if they're going to come yelling and screaming at you. If they're not going to adhere to an SLA itself, then maybe you're not going to do that as well. And then those informal arrangements where it's like, hey, if this thing ever breaks down, can I just call you? Yeah, but that's not an SLA at all, right? Because that's very informal. Just, I can maybe try to help you. And if it's one of those scenarios, again, where it's not predictable for you, you've got to really consider not putting that into the SLA. Scott, thoughts on that, on all 3 of those?
Lots of thoughts, but I know we're running short on time, so I will condense them. Yeah, I mean,
you're doing fine.
I have run into some crazy environments, as I think every MSP or IT service provider out there has. You run into environments where people have taped things together, stapled things to walls. I ran into one guy who, when we initially proposed to him, he said his engineering team had built a top-notch, top-tier network with all best practices in place, and what we found was a bird's nest of cables with a cable running out the window across the street into another building where his other team resided, where his rest of his network was. Crazy stuff. So you can't guarantee something that will fail. This is kind of where a conversation around should you baseline an environment comes into play, and that's it's tricky to say yes or no depending on the customers. Obviously, as a larger MSP, typically you would go in and say, okay, we need to bring you up to a certain standard of reliability here, or else we're going to blow SLA every week as each of these devices fail. You need to keep an eye out for that kind of thing. You don't want to walk into a minefield that's going to set you up for failure. And customers understand that. If you're setting a 2-hour response time or any kind of resolution time, which I don't typically recommend, but let's say you're going there, you definitely do not want to be anywhere near a place where you can tell all the servers are 10 years old and the hard drives are making ticking noises, and you're going to fail for sure. And I've been there. I've seen many. I think it's important to note that you should always be doing some kind of assessment up front. You should be using a tool like we have an RMM product. a remote monitoring and management product that does that really well. It'll deploy agents, it'll scan the assets, it'll give you a really good report on how that system is functioning. It'll identify stuff that maybe is hiding in the walls, hiding behind things, stuff that maybe a physical inventory might miss. That kind of thing is really important, and we very much grew into a process of when we take on a new environment, the first thing we do is do a full assessment of the thing, ideally before the contract's even signed, so we can lay out exactly what we're going to support and what we aren't. It helps you find those pieces of software that some kid, they hired a college kid for the summer, he wrote their CRM and then left, and now nobody supports that thing. Identifying that up front is critically important.
That's a terrifying example, man. That's awful. He built your entire CRM, the crux of your company, by some kid.
Oh, I can't tell you how many times I've run into that. So, yeah, and I mean, at that point, there's no vendor to go to. It's a conversation with the client of, you've got to get off this thing. Like, you're setting yourself up for failure. But that's where the value of an MSP comes in, whereas a guy on site maybe would just keep working with it. As an MSP, you're there to provide strategy and an overall plan, and you can say this thing has to go, and it's got to go sooner rather than later. And the customer's not going to want to hear that, but you're going to explain to them in a year when this thing fails, your entire business fails with it. You can't risk that. And they do listen to that kind of conversation. You talked about difficult clients. Some clients are just unreasonable when it comes to their uptime needs. I mentioned lawyers and real estate agents. They live on their phones. Maybe they've got a BlackBerry or whatever they might still be using. For some reason, lawyers still like BlackBerries. They definitely have their pluses and minuses. Maybe that's the only thing they care about, but they care about it being up 100% of the time, and 5 minutes of downtime is not acceptable. We need to put some kind of expectation in place that it's going to go down someday, and when it does, here's how we're going to address this. Maybe apart from the contract, maybe we have a special provision for this device that we're going to have a redundant backup or something. All these things cost money, but we're going to help you address that problem that maybe the other folks coming in the door aren't providing you with a solution to. The solution costs money, but at least we're offering you the solution. I had some customers who required immediate attention. They had CEOs, they had directors, they had VPs who just could not be on a helpline. They could not wait 4 hours for something. And at that point, maybe you need to discuss, okay, I'll dedicate you a resource. I will hire a resource for your entire company, or I will put an on-site team and manage it remotely, which I've done many times. So there's ways of solving that kind of problem, but they have to understand that that is a provision outside of your contract. Others will promise the moon, and Nick, I'm sure you've run into this. The other guy who came in to pitch them yesterday said they would do everything, anything with an IP or a blinking light, 100% carte blanche, take care of it, one low price, no problem. We need to have some kind of presentation to fight that. There's no way that that guy's going to be successful. You're going to hate him in 6 months because he's not going to be able to do all that. And we need to, talk through that process of unrealistic expectations, or if it sounds too good to be true, it's definitely going to be, and have a way to talk around that, because we are not going to say that. We are going to go in and set proper expectations. What are your thoughts on that, Nick? Have you ever run into somebody who came in and said, well, the other guy said he'd do everything and you're putting all these provisions on me?
Yeah, in some ways, what I've done when I couldn't fight it was more so just tell you what, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. I would tell you, if you think the grass is greener, by all means, go ahead. And my door is open, but understand that this is the way that we have to do things. You mentioned baselining. I also think one of the other opportunities for you guys is, do you have an unstable network or a network that's had a lot of unknowns, is do things on a time and materials basis to get them to not just baselining, but to a stable position where I can manage this now, and you say, I'm not willing to put an SLA on this because, to your point, you said everything that's got a cable or a blinking light or whatever, you don't want that. But definitely if you could say, once I get it to a certain level of all the machines are patched, I know they're running on good hardware, at least really you've assessed it, to a place where you feel comfortable enough, I can support this. I can do this and be profitable because it's predictable now, then it makes sense.
Yeah,
so
I'll just point out, you bring up a couple of things I just want to touch on. You want to make sure that everything that should be under warranty is under warranty. It's maintained, that warranty is up to date. You have to explain to customers that if you're not under warranty, this thing fails and it's $10,000. as opposed to if you pay your minimal warranty fees, I can replace it, next day. If you don't have a warranty, it might be next week. So, make sure that you're on top of your customers' warranties as well, because that'll help you, and it will raise the bar as far as the kind of service that your customers receive. You may even want to track those warranties, which we did, because obviously we want to sell them that warranty, which is great. And for our own sanity's sake, we want to make sure that we do have 24-hour response from the major vendors so that we can get you back up, as fast as humanly possible, because we are looking out for your best interests. The last thing I want to point out is I think you raised a good point. Some customers just aren't worth the pain, and it is worth not pursuing some. And I know that the tendency is just to want as much business as you can possibly get your hands on, and I totally get that. But you take on the wrong customer, you will absolutely regret it, and your team will regret it, and that may result in unhappy staff, losing staff, or just generally a bad reputation going out into the community from this customer who came in with unrealistic expectations, can never be satisfied, and now they're your problem.
That's perfect. There's a lot of power in saying no, and quite honestly, I can tell you from owning 4 businesses, it's a really good position to be in when you can say no to someone. So don't be afraid to do that. So we've got, we're at the half an hour mark, but we've got 2 more slides we want to cover, and these are kind of important. So just to kind of set an expectation on time, figure another 10, 15 minutes, something like that. I hope you guys can stay. If you can't, this will be recorded. We'll be happy to send it to you, but this is the meat of it, is really what's going to go into your SLA, and the last part we want to talk about is how to make it actionable. So those are the last 2 things. I hope you can just stay on with us about 15 minutes more, and we're going to cover this. So this is the most important part. There's some obvious stuff, but you just know what's going to be in an SLA. We're going to cover some of the things that are no surprise to you, but there are some things that are not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of break these into some groups and show you a couple of subgroups, and Scott and I are going to discuss each here. The first one is just defining the services that you have. And I've got a couple things that I'm going to put up here for you guys to look at, thinking about the scope of services. That's not just not just the types of services that you're providing, but also which parts of the environment that you're willing to protect. It can be very, very specific. We're willing to handle all of the workstations that are, I'm making this up as I go along, that are Dell something or they're, Optiplexes or whatever they are, that are, from this year forward, or, I mean, however detailed you think it needs to be, that's where you want to be, because you want to protect yourself. And the only way to protect yourself is to define what it is that you're willing to service and the services that you're willing to provide. You see support hours, system uptime, those things are kind of make sense here. What else should be in the services definition, Scott, from your standpoint?
Well, these are kind of broad terms, so they have covered a lot of it. Just in the interest of time, what I will say is scope definition is critically important. And going in with the concept of saying, we support everything, you definitely don't want to be in that situation, because at some point you will have to, and you will regret it. Gray area, as I call it, is the enemy of order in an MSP. So make sure there is no gray area. Have a catch-all at the bottom. If it isn't covered by all this, here's the time and materials billing that we will give you. And the way I approached that, and I think it was very effective, was saying if you sign up with a contract with us, our typical time and materials billing is X, for this kind of tech, X for this kind of tech. But if you sign an agreement with us, well, good news, we're going to give you a discount on each of those kinds of services. So if you do want to use us for time and materials for, big projects or what have you, great news, we're your people for that too, and we're going to give you a great rate compared to what someone walking in off the street would have. In many cases, we offered an escalating discount. So if you choose to use us for, X number of time and materials dollars, we're going to give you this discount. If you want to go even further and maybe build some other stuff into your budget for this year, great. Beyond that threshold, we're going to give you an even better discount, for doing all your business with us, because obviously we want to be your sole provider. So make sure that gray area is very well fleshed out. Make sure you have a catch-all for anything that didn't get caught by that gray area. Make sure that they clearly understand the software you support, and anything else is just time and materials or what have you, however you want to structure that, but you don't want to be caught trying to support that college kid's CRM that he did 3 years ago, because it's not supportable. And you're in a corner at that point, and they are not happy with you immediately. Things like system uptime you mentioned, you can't guarantee system uptime. All you can do is shoot for, the best possible. What you can say is, historically, if you're tracking things properly, which I hope that you've been instituted some kind of metrics to go with these SLAs. You can say, we have an average of keeping our customers up 99.4% of the time, or whatever you're willing to pull out of your metrics. That's a great thing to show in a presentation, and really gives them that good sense, and say you are working to continue to provide that. Promising that, however, that becomes a pretty, promising resolution of any kind is almost impossible. You never know what you don't know what you don't know is a common phrase I like.
Which actually brings us over to this next section here. I'm thinking about when there's a problem, what does the response look like? And you see the very first issue here for you guys in the audience is actually defining how problems should be reported. This goes back to the obligations of the customer, because if the customer doesn't tell you about it, or that they're having an issue, then you might say, based on the SLA, the clock doesn't start until you tell me about the problem. It can't just be that, oh, it's been happening since this morning. Well, that doesn't count. You just told me about it right now, and it's 4 in the afternoon, or whatever the case is. So problem reporting should be defined. And then you see here response times and resolution times. In some cases, though, I'm gonna disagree slightly, Scott. I'm thinking about very specific situations where you can at least define, assumed resolution times around things like, let's say someone's got image level backups, and they've got continuous recovery going on where they have images that are constantly being restored to a known system, things like that, where there's a pretty good guess on what their recovery time objective, the recovery point objective is going to be, where they can figure out, I can get it up reasonably within whatever it is, an hour, 4 hours, or something like that. However, I will side with Scott on saying, if you know that you think in theory, or even if you've tested it multiple times, that it will take you, let's say, an hour to recover system X, something along those lines, right? I would not put that the system uptime incorporates whatever percentage of time frame that is for an hour of downtime, nor would I make the problem resolution time be an hour. I would make it 4 to 8 hours. I would give them a range, and then you end up being like Scotty on Star Trek. I don't know if you guys go that far back, but the original Scotty on Star Trek, he always said, if it took an hour, I would quote a day. If it took a day, I would quote a week. Something like that. That's kind of my my take on it. But there was an actual Star Trek Next Generation episode where he did that. He kind of just said, I always gave them a longer time frame, and then I always end up over delivering. And that's, if you were ever going to quote system uptime and problem resolution times, it's something in that realm where beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's going to take 14 minutes. It always will. Good. Then it's 4 to 8 hours. And that way you look like a rock star. And you got it up in less than an hour, and they're happy with you. So.
Yeah, under promise, over deliver is a great way to continue that great relationship with your customer and continue to delight them. If you set that too aggressively, you're always under delivering, and that is never a good place to be.
Yep. Other thoughts on problem response? Anything else?
Well, there are things, and you touched on it. If you are sure about your resolution time, or you've put a system in place because you have a specific resolution time in your mind, then yes, maybe we can talk about how quickly we're going to bring things back. But definitely, if with things like threats like ransomware and that sort of thing out there these days, you have to be really thoughtful about what you're going to hard and fast agree to, and things you need to widely time box, because there are threats out there these days that, it used to be simple, and resolving things like ransomware and other things can be wildly complex now. And if you go to a system that was critical, ransomware has locked it down, you're not paying the ransom, and you're going out to restore, and that backup for some reason fails, now you're not looking at 2 hours, you're looking at 2 weeks. So
indeed.
Just be careful and thoughtful.
Cool. Let me put up a couple other issues here that I thought of we should have a little bit of a discussion around. And the first one is the support constraints. Just there are limitations to what you can and can't do. There might be time constraints. Maybe you don't offer 24/7 support. Maybe you're literally only offering, call it 5 by 8, 5 by 10, 5 by 12. Whatever it is, but you've got to put those constraints in there to establish the expectation that we don't work Saturdays at 2 in the morning, or if that's the case. Then I already mentioned customer responsibilities when it came to problem reporting, but there are other things where customer responsibilities might be things like you can't go and add a new service online, because there's a million as-a-services that exist today with the digital transformation of businesses. Just about everything is now a software company with some kind of specialty in the real world, and maybe you might say you can't go and just start using Dropbox, or our OneDrive or something like that, those things have to be sanctioned by us, and that way we include it in the SLA, with those kinds of things. And then also want to just make sure that you're addressing any kind of confidential or person identifiable information, anything, intellectual property, that kind of stuff that needs to be protected. And if it does, and that's part of the service level agreement, from both a backup perspective as well as a security perspective, I always tell MSPs, make sure that the specific data sets are defined, because if that stuff, they have a data breach, and you put every safeguard in place, but there's an extra set of data that's an outlier on someone's workstation or whatever that shouldn't be there, and you haven't defined what is and isn't considered confidential or protected information, they're coming after you because it's your fault, and when we all know it's not your fault. So, Scott's thought on those or any other issues you can think of that should be in an SLA?
Well, you mentioned the other issues, support constraints. There's ticket volume, right? And some days ticket volume is high and some days it's low. Whenever you call your local telco, you will occasionally get the message that volume is higher than they expected, wait times are a little longer. Those sorts of things happen, and you need to think about that. You're going to have a bad day. It's going to happen. You're going to have sick, staff. There's going to be virus or ransomware outbreaks hitting, 5 of your customers at once. There's going to be a bad day, and you need to plan for that bad day. And typically the planning is communication. And I'll kind of tie it back to what I said at the beginning. It's like a great relationship. You need a lot of communication. And if you're going to miss SLAs, you're going to miss something, have a provision in your contract for how you're going to communicate. Who are you going to communicate to when things go bad, when things can't be done, and what does that conversation look like? Really good idea to map all that out before you hit that bad day rather than during the bad day, because nobody's happy to talk to you on that day if you haven't figured that out already. Customer responsibilities, I talked a bit about at the beginning, user education. Make sure that your customers are either having you come and host an education day, or if it's a large environment, giving out some kind of, who we are, what we do, and how you engage with us kind of information. Maybe you want to host a webinar their employees can call into, whatever you need to do, but make sure that communication and education happens right at the beginning so that they know who you are, they know how great you are, and what you're going to do for them. Clear understanding of contact points, how they get in touch with you, and of course the SLAs are critically important. You don't want them, half of them emailing you, half of them calling their salesperson, half of them calling their client services manager. That traffic going all through your company is not good for keeping things on the rails. So let's have a singular point of contact. You might be using a piece of software like our own MSP manager to create a customer portal where everybody goes in and is able to enter tickets right then and there, check the status of their tickets. That's a great way to do that. Email works, but it tends to get pretty messy pretty fast. So have that, set up for the customers, make sure they understand. We used to give out little stickers and mouse pads with the contact info right on them to all the staff. So they had right on their computer who to call if they had an issue, how to get in touch with us, what website to go to, et cetera.
No, perfect here. Let's do this last part here, and we'll get you guys on your way. The last part is making the SLA actionable. I see, even though the SLA is an agreement, it's a contract, you also want to make sure that it is something where it helps your business grow. You learn from the constraints, if you will, that you put into an agreement, right? Every agreement is a constraint. It's saying, I'm willing to do this, you're willing to do that, that's it. They're not willing to pay more, you're not willing to work more. I mean, you obviously are and you want to make more, but you get my point within the context of an SLA. But you want to make it actionable so that you can grow your business. So there's a couple of ways to do that. The first one is make sure that by defining it precisely, we talked about this before, both in scope and the services and what percentage of the environment and which devices and all that, that does give you the opportunity then when things happen to those other types of devices and other services that you don't cover, that kind of thing, it gives you an opportunity to then increase your penetration within a customer. That's one way that an SLA becomes actionable because you are limiting what it is you're doing. I'm going to run through 4 of these if you don't mind, Scott, and then I'll have you comment on them all. The second one is involving the customer. We just did a or are we doing? I think it's actually upcoming, come to think of it, about having customer meetings is one of our 6 webcasts. And it always involves trying to get the customer involved because they know what's going on in their environment outside the things that you're doing. If your people are touching, let's say all the file servers and Exchange and, some database applications or whatever else it is, but there's some other things going on, the head of IT or internally, or maybe it might be just the CEO of the organization that's your customer, whatever it is, they're going to hear about other rumblings and other things that are going on, concerns that they have. Maybe you don't even offer security as a service today, but you're hearing them saying, we're really concerned about ransomware. Could you guys offer something? And now suddenly, because you involve the customer, the SLA, because of the constraints that were in there, it now becomes a little more actionable by involving them. In the process, you've expanded your offerings, but at the same time, you want to involve them just so that this isn't a one-sided SLA where you tell them, here, this is the way we're willing to work. I don't do Windows, so to speak. That kind of a mentality. Instead, you've made it to the, thank you. Kelly just told me frequent customer meetings is next week. So look for an email from the SolarWinds MSP folks on that if you want to see about customer meetings. We're doing another webcast just like today's. But involving the customer helps make that actionable as well. The other one is to utilize software that's going to automate the work that you're doing, helps put into action the things that you're promising in your SLA. Especially if you're doing the math going, I think I can manage all those machines and I can still make a profit. Well, if you utilize software that automates a lot, RMM software, patching, things that are doing scanning for any kind of viruses and malware, anything like that helps make it more actionable and helps you make it more profitable as well. And then the last part here is kind of reporting on what you're doing, again, showing your value. We talked about that at the beginning of the webcast, and adapting, figuring out it is working, it's not working, and if it's not working, let's do a test measure, improve. Let's try something different and improve our business, improve our value, hopefully improve our revenue as well. So, Scott, comments on any and all of this?
Yeah, basically, metrics are key. If you're going to have an SLA, we need some way to track it, prove it, report on it. If not, then everyone will always assume they're right, and you're going to be in a situation where it's an argument back and forth about how long did that actually take. So make sure that you've got metrics in place if you're going to have, good SLAs. How do you do that? I think you touched on it. Software is really the best way to do it. Whether it's something like, our own N-Central or our own MSP RMM, coupled with a great ticketing system, in our case, MSP Manager. You want to make sure that you've got a way for customers to interact with you, a way to capture your technicians' time and actions with a clock attached to it, and a full detailed audit of what they did, when they did it, and then in a way that you can present that to your customer in, typically I would recommend quarterly reviews. I think you touched on that as well there. You want to go in and say, look at the great job we did. And ideally, you're going in and saying, we anticipated, this ticket volume with this much work. Well, we actually did lots more than that. And if you position things right, you will typically do more work than your estimate was at the beginning, perhaps. But that looks great to your customer. We did all this extra work. We're not charging you another dime. We just want to show all the hard work we did to keep your environment up and running. And I find they really appreciate that conversation on a semi-regular basis, especially because we're not on site as much as maybe their local IT guy had been. We want to make sure our presence is felt. They shake our hand, they remember us. We have a chance to talk business, talk future needs, and you touched on that as well. We want to make sure that we're going in and providing them with a strategy, 1 year, 2 year of PC refresh planning, software planning, action against things like growing threats like ransomware. We provide an entire inventory of great ways to deal with these things. We want to make sure you're educated on them. Here they are, and here's how we did against our SLAs. Ideally, everybody comes out all smiles at the end of that, but you can't show what you didn't measure. So make sure that you've got something in place to measure that information.
Perfect. Great responses there. So I think we're definitely out of time because we're way out of there. And I'm looking at the Q&A box right now, and there's only just a couple of simple questions here, so I'll answer them. Reginald's asking about, is there a link to watch webinars 1 and 2? And there are. And Kelly, if you can just pop up something in the chat box or just type in here live, is there either a landing page they can go to, or is there something where they get sent out the previous webinars in email? That would be nice to know if you can help me there with that answer. And then let's see here. Oh, that's something else entirely. Thank you. Oh, I see that here. Someone actually sent that to you, a question privately. So if you can let me know about the answer with 1 and 2. And the other question, Tim asked, can you send out the slides? Those will be sent out to you as well. Victor's asking about sample SLAs, and as is Chris, you guys are thinking alike. There's actually a blog article that I wrote on SolarWinds MSP's blog about SLAs. It's where all the content for this webcast actually came from. And at the end of that blog is a couple of links to some example SLAs that you can use that act as a basis. So they aren't necessarily templated, like here, just plug in your stuff and you're good to go and off to the races. I'll see if I can find a link, Victor, while we're asking the last question here. And then another question came in from Steve, and maybe even you can answer this, Scott, and I can try and find the link to the blog real quick while you're answering. But Steve says, you mentioned software to do all the initial work evaluation, one that finds, quote, hidden items in the walls. What program is that? And while we're doing that, I'm going to go and look for the blog on the SLAs real quick.
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple of things you can do with that. So if you have a good RMM application, typically they will facilitate that pretty well. So in my day, I was actually using our own product, MSP and Central. So I was a customer before I was sales engineering, then product management, and now product marketing. So I liked it so much I bought the company. I was using MSP and Central to deploy agents into the environment. They're pretty non-invasive, and that will give me full asset details, full software information, age of the system, what CPU it's running, memory, disk, all the kind of information I need to get a feel for the health of those systems, whether or not patch management's up to date, whether or not they're using an antivirus, all the things that I really need to know going in, as well as a full inventory of everything with an IP. So that might include routers and switches hiding behind a desk or whatever. And then you can run something like an executive summary report, which if you have the on-premises version of N-Central, you can get Report Manager that has a really great PC refresh report and a good software inventory and all those sorts of things that you would want to run. And then I take that, I evaluate it with my technical lead for that environment. We go in and present it, and we talk about bringing them up to speed as far as kind of a baseline is concerned. We talk about future things, so things we've immediately identified. We don't give away everything for free at that point because maybe we don't have the contract signed, but we do go in and point out, we see all this stuff and we'd be really happy to help you address it. You could also do something that's sort of new. We have a product called Risk Intelligence, which is quite neat. Very inexpensive too, which is why I think it's a great auditing tool. Basically, it goes in and deploys sort of a mini package of an agent, so it's very non-invasive. And basically, all it does is identify everything in the environment that is not patched, so OS vulnerabilities and data vulnerabilities. So it'll identify where maybe, the HR computer has a bunch of PDFs or Excel files downloaded with credit card, personal information, HIPAA compliancy type information, all that kind of stuff that should not be sitting around open. And providing that as a bit of a security analysis value add is really nice because most people aren't doing that. So coming in with something like that as an addition is really cool too, and sort of sets you apart with very little impact to you. So it's nice to be able to provide that kind of thing. So those are the two types of software I'd recommend. Someone mentioned ticketing here in the questions as well. MSP Manager is sort of your entry level or basic ticketing system, but it has everything that a growing MSP would need. And that's a great way to provide a customer portal, capture tickets, capture information, and it ties directly in with our RMM products. So when something goes wrong, it creates a ticket for you rather than you having to go and manually enter all that info. It gives you a nice mobile app too so that your techs in the field can enter stuff while they're on the go rather than trying to remember what they did and coming back and filling it in. So SolarWinds MSP has basically all the tools you need to do all of these things. So absolutely, I'd recommend you grab a trial or check it out.
Wonderful, and I think that actually ends our questions. We have still 52 people on the call today, so you guys stayed on for the full time. We really appreciate it. Hey, Scott, thank you very much, man, for all the input you put in today. I think this was a really good conversation we had. I got a couple of comments here saying thanks for providing the information, so I think we succeeded today, so thank you very much.
Good, yeah, thank you. It's a topic that is common. We have large customer events where all these MSPs come together, and this is a very common question amongst peer groups. What do you do? So it's a well thought out topic that I don't think has perfect answers anywhere. So you have to tailor it to your business. So happy to contribute.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And you guys in the audience, thank you for providing some questions. I'm glad you guys are super interested in this. I posted the link in the chat think it's in the chat there for all you guys. Went out to all attendees with the link to the blog. And Anthony, I think it was Anthony, was the guy that went out and found it as well for me. I happened to look it up myself manually, but I think he found it as well. So thank you guys for participating in that. And Jason says, I don't see any links. Look in the chat and not in the Q&A and see if it's there. And that was Nathan. So I said Anthony. I was close. There was some. I saw the fan in there. It's Nathan. Thank you very much. Sorry, Nathan. You were the one that helped me find the blog. And then let me go ahead and see if I can put this into the Q&A. Not there either, Victor says. So let me do this.
I think it's solarwindsmsp.com/blogs. Is that correct?
Yeah, just do this way. For you guys, go to solarwindsmsp.com/blog, and in the search box there, put an SLA. That's what I just did. It's the first one that comes up. I wrote it, Nick Cavalancia. It was done in March 29th of this year, so it's relatively recent. So solarwindsmsp.com/blog, or just go to SolarWindsMSP. There's a blog link in the top, and then once you're in the blog, search for SLA. You will find it immediately. Really easy to do there. So anyway, so thank you guys very much for your time today. Glad you participated. Glad you got something out of this. Remember, we've got 3 more of these coming up, and then the folks at SolarWinds MSP will make sure they get you the links for the previous 2 as well if you want to watch those recordings. And we hope to see you on the next couple of webcasts. Again, next week's this Wednesday at, I think it's 2 p.m. Eastern. We're doing it on frequent customer meetings. So be sure to participate in that, and we'll see you on the next webcast. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.